Have you ever stumbled upon something so ordinary that it stopped you in your tracks? Something so small and seemingly insignificant, like a slip of paper or a scribbled note, but it hits you in the chest like a freight train because it carries a piece of your past that you thought was long gone? That's exactly what happened to Sarah Miller one quiet Wednesday afternoon at her local library in Oregon. She wasn't looking for anything deep, just a new recipe, maybe a little inspiration for dinner. She pulled a worn-out cookbook from the bottom shelf in the back corner of the nonfiction aisle, one of those spots where the lighting's a little dimmer and no one really goes. But when she opened it, nestled between the pages like a forgotten bookmark, was an old, yellowing recipe card. And what she saw next froze her on the spot, because that wasn't just anyone's handwriting. It was her grandmother's, the same grandmother who passed away 10 years ago. And that's just where this story begins. Now, before we dive deeper, let me ask you something. Have you ever lost someone so close to your heart that the very memory of them becomes like a quiet whisper you're afraid you'll forget? We all have those people. And when they're gone, we hang on to the little things, photos, voice messages, maybe even a piece of clothing that still carries their scent. But what if out of nowhere, the universe dropped something into your hands, something you weren't even looking for, that suddenly made you question everything? That's not just coincidence. And in Sarah's case, this single recipe card would unravel a chain of events that not only reconnected her with her family's past, but led her into a decades-old mystery no one had ever dared to solve. Stick with me here, because you're going to get the answer you came looking for. I'm not just going to tease you with half-truths or fluff content like some videos out there. What you're about to watch isn't just a story, it's a journey. And if you're someone who's ever wondered if life is trying to send you signs, or if you believe in fate, or maybe you're just someone who knows how powerful memories can be, then you're in the right place. This story was made for you. I want you to picture Sarah as more than just a woman flipping through library books. She's someone like you, a daughter, a granddaughter, someone just trying to make it through the day. She's not famous. She's not flashy. She's just real. And maybe that's why what happened to her hit so hard. Because it could happen to any of us. It starts with something as small as a card with a handwritten recipe for sweet cinnamon raisin bread. Something her grandmother used to make every Christmas Eve. But her grandma never wrote her recipes down, or so the family thought. So, how did this one end up in a public library book? And why now? Why here? And why does the handwriting look fresh? Not like something from a decade ago, but something written in recent years. As Sarah held that card, her hands trembled, her eyes welled up. It wasn't just the handwriting that felt familiar, it was the little heart doodle her grandmother always added beside her signature. It was too exact to be a coincidence. And yet, it didn't make sense. That was just the first piece of the puzzle. What she didn't know at that moment was that someone else had touched that card before her, after her grandmother had passed. Someone who knew things about her family that Sarah herself didn't. And someone who had been waiting, in silence, for the right person to find it. As we go deeper into the story, you're going to meet people who carry secrets, you're going to hear about choices made decades ago that still echo in the present, and you're going to uncover a truth that even Sarah wasn't prepared to face. But this isn't just about mystery, it's about identity. About how the people we love leave behind more than just memories. Sometimes they leave behind questions. And sometimes they leave behind answers we don't even know we're searching for, until we find them. So, if you've ever believed in signs, if you've ever lost someone and hoped for one more message, one more connection, keep watching. Because what Sarah found inside that book didn't just change how she remembered her grandmother. It changed everything she thought she knew about her own life. And what happened next, just minutes after she walked out of that library, is something no one could have predicted. But here's the thing. When she tried to return to that same library the next day, something was missing. Something crucial. And that's when she knew someone was watching. Sarah Miller hadn't planned on visiting the library that day. In fact, she almost didn't go. She had been feeling drained, mentally, emotionally, after a rough few months that left her questioning nearly everything in her life. Just 6 weeks earlier, her long-term boyfriend had abruptly ended their relationship, claiming he needed to find himself, which, in Sarah's words, meant he found someone else. The breakup wasn't just painful, It was disorienting. They'd built a life together, shared plans, dreams, routines. Now she was navigating the quiet of her apartment alone, relearning how to cook for one, and scrolling through Netflix menus she used to scroll with him. And when the loneliness crept in too loud, she distracted herself with small errands. That's what the library was supposed to be, a quiet errand. A peaceful place with the familiar smell of old pages and the comfort of silence. But instead, it became the start of something far bigger, something she didn't yet understand. She'd recently started dabbling in old-school cooking, trying to recreate the meals her grandmother used to make when she was a child. Part of it was nostalgia. Part of it was a coping mechanism. There was something grounding in the flour, the sugar, the rising dough. It brought her back to simpler times, to her grandma's warm kitchen filled with cinnamon, vanilla, and soft gospel music humming through an old radio. Her grandmother, Ruth Ellen Miller, had passed away in 2015 after a slow battle with Alzheimer's, a disease that had taken her memory in pieces, until all that was left were moments Sarah clung to. Everyone in the family had agreed. Ruth never wrote anything down. Her recipes lived in her head, a pinch of this and a touch of that. So when Sarah opened that cookbook in the library and saw Ruth's handwriting, her exact loops, curves, and even that signature heart beside her name, it didn't just stir emotion. It didn't just confuse her. It felt impossible. That night, she took the recipe card home. She probably shouldn't have, but something inside her said it was hers, even though she had no idea how it got there. She laid it gently on the kitchen table like it was made of glass, staring at every detail. The card looked old, but not old enough. There wasn't any fading or brittle edges. And there was something strange, something she hadn't noticed right away. A second set of initials penciled lightly in the bottom right corner. CW, they didn't match anyone she knew. Not in her family. Not in her circle. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone had placed it there intentionally, like bait. Over the next few days, Sarah became obsessed. She looked up library records, hoping to see if the book had recently been donated. But it had been in the collection for over 8 years, cataloged, shelved, and almost never checked out. That alone raised questions. Why would her grandmother's card, if it really was hers, end up in a book no one ever read? Why now? She even spoke to the head librarian, a soft-spoken man in his 60s named Dean, who told her the book had only been checked out 3 times in the past 5 years, and the last time was nearly 9 months ago. He seemed genuinely curious about her discovery, but also gently reminded her that people sometimes leave things in books by accident. Sarah nodded, thanked him, and left. But her gut told her this was no accident. The next day, when she returned to take another look, the book was gone. Not checked out. Not moved to another section. Gone. Dean claimed he had no idea what happened. It wasn't marked as missing, but it wasn't in the system either. That was when Sarah's unease grew. She couldn't stop thinking about the initials, CW, and who else could have touched that card. She started digging through old family photos, letters, journals, anything that could hint at someone with those initials. But nothing. She even called her Aunt Lillian, her grandma's younger sister who now lived in Florida, but Lillian said the same thing everyone else said. Your grandmother never wrote anything down. Not a single recipe. Still, Sarah couldn't let it go. She began to wonder if someone had known about the card all along. Maybe it wasn't forgotten. Maybe it was planted. And if so, why? She also noticed something else unnerving in the days that followed. Twice, she saw the same unfamiliar gray sedan parked down the street from her apartment. No movement. No one inside visible. Just parked. Idle. Watching. Once she convinced herself it was just coincidence. Twice. Not so easy. Her neighborhood wasn't exactly high traffic. And that wasn't a car she'd ever seen before. She began to feel watched. Then came the envelope. No return address. No postage. Just slipped under her door sometime between 10 p.m. and midnight. Inside was a single Polaroid. An old photo of her grandmother standing on a porch Sarah didn't recognize, wearing an apron, holding what looked like the same loaf of sweet cinnamon bread from the recipe. And scribbled in block letters across the back were 5 words, SHE didn't tell you everything. Sarah's hands shook as she held the photo, her heart thudding against her ribs. This wasn't just nostalgia anymore. This was someone playing a game. But who? And what did they know about her grandmother that she didn't? The more she tried to trace back her grandmother's life, the more gaps she found. There were years of Ruth's life that no one in the family ever talked about, especially before she had kids. A brief mention once of a summer she spent in Chicago, a job she took in Kansas, a boarding house she lived in just for a few months. But no photos, no letters, no real timeline, just shadows of a story. What if her grandmother had secrets? What if there were people tied to those secrets, people who didn't want Sarah digging deeper? And what if the person who left that recipe card wasn't just trying to reconnect her with a memory, but was trying to lead her towards something hidden? Or worse, trying to lure her into something dangerous? By the end of that week, Sarah had stopped sleeping properly. Every creak in the hallway made her jump. Her phone rang twice with no caller ID, and both times, no one answered on the other end. It was beginning to feel like the card wasn't just part of her grandmother's past, it was a key. But a key to what? And why was it showing up now, of all times? The deeper she searched, the more the ground seemed to shift beneath her feet. Because the past wasn't just resurfacing, it was crawling out of the dark, piece by piece, and reaching for her. And someone, somewhere, was watching every move she made. The following morning, Sarah awoke to the sound of pounding rain against her windows and a heaviness in her chest she couldn't explain. She hadn't slept more than a few hours, and her mind was still tangled in the unease of that Polaroid photo. She kept turning it over in her hands, reading those same 5 words again and again. SHE didn't tell you everything, trying to make sense of what they meant. The handwriting was unfamiliar, harsh, and clearly deliberate. She wondered if it was connected to the CW initials she found on the recipe card. Who was sending her these things? Why the cryptic clues and not a straight answer? She finally decided to reach out to someone she hadn't spoken to in years, her cousin Brooke. They'd been close as kids, always spending weekends at Grandma Ruth's house baking cookies and playing dress-up in her old church hats. But they'd drifted apart over the years, especially after a falling out at their grandfather's funeral. Still, if anyone might remember something, or had heard family whispers, it was Brooke. Sarah messaged her on Facebook, half expecting to be ignored. But within an hour, Brooke responded. The message was short and strange. Let's talk in person. Not over text. Tomorrow at 3. I'll come to you. No emojis, no warmth, just direct. That only made Sarah more anxious. Why the secrecy? Was Brooke involved somehow? Or did she know something she was afraid to put in writing? When Brooke arrived the next afternoon, her demeanor was guarded. She looked older than Sarah remembered, thinner, more serious, wearing dark glasses even though the rain had stopped. She stepped inside, glanced around nervously, and asked Sarah to put her phone in the freezer. Confused, Sarah laughed. But Brooke didn't. Just do it, she said. They can listen through microphones, even when they're off. At first, Sarah thought she was being paranoid. But there was something in Brooke's voice that didn't feel like crazy. It felt like fear. As they sat at the kitchen table, Brooke leaned in and finally spoke. She remembered the recipe card. Not that specific one, but the handwriting. She said years ago, shortly after their grandmother's death, she had found a small metal tin in Ruth's sewing room filled with similar cards, some with recipes, others with names, dates, and symbols she couldn't understand. Brooke claimed she mentioned it once to their Uncle Doug, and the very next day, the tin vanished. No one in the family ever brought it up again. When Brooke asked Doug about it, he told her to leave it alone, then threatened to cut her out of the will if she started asking questions. There are things about Grandma you don't want to know, he'd said. At the time, Brooke had backed off, thinking maybe it was just some odd family drama. But now, with Sarah finding that card and receiving that photo, it didn't seem random anymore. As Brooke shared more, it became clear that someone in their family, or someone close to it, was actively hiding something. But Sarah wasn't prepared for what Brooke said next. I think Grandma was involved in something, she whispered. Something serious. And whatever it was, it didn't end when she died. Sarah's stomach turned. She wanted to press further, But before she could, there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp knocks. Not rushed, not casual. Intentional. Brooke froze. Sarah peered through the peephole, but there was no one there. Just the same gray sedan parked at the curb. When she opened the door, the only thing on the welcome mat was an envelope, sealed with a wax stamp, something old-fashioned, almost theatrical. She picked it up with trembling hands and opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a list of 6 names. None of them meant anything to Sarah, but Brooke stared at them and quietly whispered, "They're all dead." That was when Sarah knew she was in over her head. The first name on the list, Connie Walters, clicked immediately.
CW.
The same initials on the recipe card. She looked her up that night and found a brief obituary from 1998. Connie had died in a fire. House explosion. Ruled accidental. But something about it felt off. No family photos. No mention of survivors. No real history. Just a name. A cause of death.
And a gap.
Sarah began to wonder if Connie wasn't just a random person but someone her grandmother had once known, maybe even protected. Maybe Ruth's recipes weren't just recipes at all. What if they were coded messages or part of something bigger that was hidden in plain sight? The next morning, Sarah rushed to the local historical society, hoping to find more about Connie or any of the other names. But when she got there, the small records room had been temporarily closed due to unforeseen maintenance issues. The man behind the desk seemed flustered, overly polite, and oddly eager to get rid of her. When she asked if she could leave her contact info to be notified when the records were available again, he said they didn't keep a waitlist. It didn't make sense. Nothing about it did. That night, Sarah came home to find her apartment door slightly ajar. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. But the recipe card, the one she had found in the library book, was gone. Her heart sank. It wasn't just the loss of a sentimental object, it was evidence. A link to her grandmother. And now, someone had taken it, right from under her nose. Whoever this was, they weren't just leaving clues anymore. They were actively erasing them, one by one. As Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, trying to calm her racing thoughts, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. No name. No icon. Just a single sentence. "You're looking in the wrong direction." She stared at it for what felt like hours, heart pounding. Was it a threat? A warning? Or a clue? She didn't know yet. But one thing was now crystal clear. Someone was pulling strings in the background. And Sarah was no longer just chasing a memory. She was walking into a truth that someone was determined to bury. The tension hadn't even begun to settle when Sarah's cousin Brooke called her in a panic the following evening. Her voice cracked through the phone, trembling and rushed, unlike the cool, guarded tone she'd used before. "I got one too," she said. At first, Sarah didn't understand. One what? Brooke's breath was shaky. "An envelope. Just like yours. Same wax seal. It was under my windshield when I came out of the grocery store." Sarah felt her heart clench in her chest. Brooke had already been hesitant about getting involved again. Now she was pulled in even deeper. She said she hadn't opened the envelope yet, too scared to see what was inside. Sarah insisted she come over immediately. When Brooke arrived, drenched from the sudden rainstorm outside, she handed over the envelope like it was a piece of biohazard evidence. Sarah opened it slowly, carefully, and inside was something even more chilling than before, a photograph. It was old and grainy, clearly taken decades ago, maybe in the 70s. It showed a group of 6 people standing in a circle in what looked like a church basement. And right in the center was Grandma Ruth. She looked younger than Sarah had ever seen her, no more than 25, with a solemn expression and a hand resting on a table covered with what appeared to be papers, books, and candles. It wasn't a church bake sale. It looked more like a ritual. There were markings drawn on the table that Sarah didn't recognize, and the people surrounding Ruth weren't smiling. In fact, several of them had their faces turned away from the camera, as if they knew they were being watched. On the back of the photo was a date, June 14th, 1973, and scribbled beneath it, in the same block handwriting from before, were the words, "She made a promise that night." Brooke backed away, like the photo burned her. She claimed she'd never seen it before. Sarah believed her. But now, everything they thought they knew about their grandmother was unraveling fast. If this photo was real, then Ruth had been involved in something, a secret gathering, a group, something that wasn't part of any family lore. And the phrase, "she made a promise," echoed in Sarah's mind, refusing to let go. What kind of promise? To whom? And what if breaking it is what led to this entire chain of events? But things weren't just strange for Sarah and Brooke. That same night, Sarah's neighbor across the hall, an older woman named Mrs. Driscoll, knocked timidly on her door. She was the kind of neighbor who mostly kept to herself, always polite but private. Sarah had only had a few brief conversations with her in the 2 years she'd lived there. This time, though, the woman looked anxious. She held up a piece of torn paper. "I found this taped to my door last night," she whispered, as if someone might be listening. Sarah took it and immediately recognized the handwriting. It matched the message she'd received on her phone. "You don't know her like I did." That's all it said. Nothing else. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "Who do you think it's about?" she asked. Mrs. Driscoll's eyes watered slightly. "Your grandmother," she whispered. "She lived here before you. In that same apartment. For almost 2 years. Back in 1981. It felt like the floor beneath Sarah gave way. Her grandmother had lived here? In this very apartment? No one in her family had ever mentioned that. Sarah pushed for more, but Mrs. Driscoll claimed she couldn't remember much. She was private. Kind, but troubled. Kept a lot to herself. People came and went late at night. Then she paused. And there was that one night when she left suddenly. Never came back. Just vanished. Like she was running from something. Sarah's head spun. None of this made sense. Why would her family hide the fact that Ruth had lived in this building? And what happened the night she left? The next day, Sarah dug through public records, trying to verify the story. And it was there, in the rental history of the building, Ruth Ellen Miller, tenant from February 1980 to October 1981. The record stopped cold. No forwarding address. No notes. Nothing. Just a blank page where her trail ended. As Sarah printed the document, her phone buzzed again. Another blocked number. This time it was a voicemail. A distorted voice, unrecognizable, low and deliberate. "Stop looking, or you'll end up like her." Sarah dropped the phone. Her hands shook. This wasn't just a breadcrumb trail anymore. It was a warning. And whoever was behind it didn't want her learning the truth. But the more she uncovered, the more determined she became. There was something Ruth had done, something that bound her to a past filled with secrets, and now, Sarah was being pulled into the consequences of a decision made decades ago. Then, just as she thought things couldn't get more tangled, a man named Oliver showed up at her door claiming to have known Ruth. He said he was a friend from the circle, a phrase that immediately set alarms off in Sarah's head. Oliver was in his late 60s, well-dressed, polite, and oddly calm. He didn't offer much, only that Ruth had protected people once. She chose the hard path, he said, but she didn't walk away clean. Sarah didn't know whether to trust him. He seemed sincere, but there was something too rehearsed in the way he spoke, like he'd told this story many times before, with careful edits. Before he left, he handed her a folded page from an old journal, written in Ruth's unmistakable handwriting. It was a list of ingredients, but they weren't for food. They were chemical compounds, solvents,
Dyes.
preservatives, strange, medical-sounding names. At the bottom, a final note. Only use if you must. It can't be undone. Sarah stared at it, horrified. What had her grandmother been involved in? And, more importantly, was it really over? Or was Sarah now the next piece of the puzzle in a game that had been set in motion long before she was born? As she turned to ask Oliver more questions, he was gone. Vanished down the stairwell like smoke. No car outside. No sign he'd ever been there. Sarah was left holding the journal page, the photo, the list of names, and a million questions. Because nothing added up anymore. Not Ruth's past. Not her family's silence. Not the warnings, the threats, or the strangers who seemed to know more than they were willing to share. And just when she thought the web of secrets couldn't stretch any further, her mother called. Her voice was cold, firm, and different than usual. "We need to talk. I know what you found, and you're not going to like the truth." Sarah never expected the conversation with her mother to go the way it did. She had imagined anger, denial, maybe even fear, but not that cold, emotionless voice. Her mom had always been warm, if a little reserved, but now there was something almost rehearsed in the way she spoke, like she was reading from a script she'd memorized long ago. She said nothing for several seconds after Sarah asked about the photograph, the names, and the mysterious circle Ruth had been part of. Then, she simply said, "There are things you were never meant to know. If you care about your future, you'll stop now." No elaboration. No explanation. Just a warning, delivered with the same finality as a slammed door. Sarah was left staring at the silent phone screen, heart pounding, realizing that this was no longer just about uncovering a forgotten family secret. It was about survival. Later that evening, something else changed. She noticed a black SUV parked across the street from her apartment. It had tinted windows, no plates, and never moved. She watched it for hours, thinking maybe it belonged to a new neighbor or someone visiting. But it was still there the next morning. And the next. She tried to convince herself it was a coincidence, maybe someone working nearby. But deep down, she knew. Her every instinct screamed that she was being watched. When she finally worked up the nerve to walk toward it with her phone camera ready, the SUV pulled off slowly, disappearing down the road without a sound. That was the moment Sarah truly understood. This was no longer just a mystery to solve. It was something dangerous, something she had stumbled into without realizing how deep it went. The fear began to creep into her daily life like a slow leak she couldn't patch. She stopped sleeping through the night. Every creak in the floorboards sent her heart into a sprint. Every unexpected sound outside her door had her peering through the peephole. She began to check her locks 3 times before bed. The hallway lights outside her apartment flickered more than usual, and the landlord claimed it was just old wiring, but Sarah didn't believe that anymore. Then things escalated. Brooke went missing. She had called Sarah the night before, whispering that she'd found something in an old yearbook stored in a box at her dad's house, something that proved Grandma Ruth wasn't just part of the group, but one of its founders. Brooke said she had names, old documents, and even a phone number written in the margins of the yearbook. They agreed to meet in the morning, but Brooke never showed up. Sarah called, texted, left voicemails, nothing. Then she drove to her cousin's apartment, only to find the front door slightly open and the place completely ransacked. Drawers turned out, couch cushions sliced open, books torn from their shelves. But what chilled her to the bone wasn't the mess, it was what was left untouched. A single sticky note on the fridge. It read, "You were warned." Sarah filed a missing person report, but the detective she spoke with seemed uninterested, distracted, barely taking notes. He asked if Brooke had a history of drug use or mental illness, as if this disappearance was just another case of someone slipping through the cracks. Sarah tried to show him the photo, the envelope, the recipe card scans she had backed up, but he waved her off, telling her it wasn't enough to start an investigation. She could see it in his eyes. He'd either been warned off or he was part of it. That realization only deepened the pit in her stomach. She was truly alone in this now, and whoever was behind these threats had more power and reach than she'd ever imagined. The next night, she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her apartment. Not just someone passing by, but slow, deliberate pacing, back and forth. For nearly an hour. When she finally mustered the courage to peek through the peephole, no one was there. But taped to her door, just below the peephole, was a printed photo, one taken from inside her apartment. It was a picture of her asleep in bed. Her blood ran cold. The timestamp in the corner showed it had been taken just 2 nights ago. She hadn't heard a thing. That was when paranoia fully took hold. She began searching her apartment for bugs, hidden cameras, anything. She tore apart light fixtures, checked behind mirrors, lifted floorboards. She found nothing. But the feeling of being violated, watched, hunted, it wouldn't leave her. Each clue she uncovered only led to more questions. Her grandmother's involvement in the mysterious circle seemed tied to something bigger, an underground group that had operated for decades, possibly hiding in plain sight. The coded language, the ingredients list, the photograph, it all hinted at rituals, hidden knowledge, maybe even sacrifices. It sounded crazy when she thought it out loud. But the fear was real. The threats were real. And Brooke's disappearance made it undeniable. Someone was working to keep these secrets buried, and they were willing to do whatever it took to stop Sarah. She wanted to give up. Part of her even began drafting a social media post explaining everything, thinking that maybe if she went public, it would protect her. But she knew better. Posting online wouldn't scare them. It would provoke them. If this group had survived this long, they had systems in place to silence people. She couldn't rely on the police, her family, or even her neighbors. She was isolated, and the weight of that realization nearly broke her. Then, at her lowest point, she found something hidden in the lining of an old coat her grandmother had left behind in a cedar chest. A tiny compartment, sewn into the inside, sealed with wax. Inside was a small iron key attached to a tag that read Vault 12. No context. No address. Just that. It didn't solve anything. But it gave her one more breadcrumb, one more step, one more chance to understand what was really going on. She knew now that the danger wasn't just in what she might discover. It was in the fact that she was asking questions no one had dared to ask before. And someone, somewhere, was watching her every move, just waiting for her to get too close. Just when Sarah thought she was beginning to understand the shape of the nightmare she had fallen into, everything changed with a single knock on her door. It wasn't late at night, like the others. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Sunlight poured through the blinds, casting long stripes across her kitchen floor. She had been staring at the iron key for hours, trying to figure out what Vault 12 meant. Was it a bank? A storage unit? A secret room somewhere? She wasn't expecting visitors. When she opened the door, she froze. Standing there wasn't a stranger, but her mother. But this time, her mom looked different. Her usual poise had cracked. She wasn't hiding behind cold words or vague warnings. Her face was pale, drawn, and tired, like someone who hadn't slept in days. Without waiting for permission, she stepped inside and locked the door behind her. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she sat down at the kitchen table and placed a small, leather-bound notebook in front of her. Sarah immediately recognized the handwriting inside. It was Ruth's. And it wasn't a recipe book. It was a journal. Her mother took a shaky breath and finally said, "I lied to you. Not to protect Ruth, but to protect myself." Sarah's heart began to pound as her mother explained what really happened the year Ruth vanished. It wasn't about a secret society or underground rituals. Not exactly. The group Ruth was part of had nothing to do with religion or the occult. It was something far stranger. They were memory engineers. People who experimented with early forms of psychological mapping, data tracking, and induced memory regression, techniques that were never sanctioned, operating in complete secrecy, decades before the idea of artificial intelligence or neurohacking became popularized on platforms like Reddit or trending podcasts. Ruth hadn't been a follower. She had been one of the lead developers. Her job was to encode memories into analog media, cassette tapes, VHS, old recipe cards, anything that could carry embedded messages that were harmless to most people but could trigger deep responses in those coded to interpret them. Sarah stared at her mother, stunned. "So, the card I found, it wasn't a recipe?" "No," her mother said, pressing her lips together. "It was a map. A memory vault." Sarah's entire body went cold. The phrases, the symbols, the repetition, it all made sense now. Ruth hadn't left behind breadcrumbs for a reason. She had left them because someone else had stolen something from her, someone in the group, and she needed a way to retrieve it one day. Her memory vaults had been scattered, disguised as mundane objects. The card wasn't the only one. The photo, the list, the strange envelope, each was a piece of a coded neural puzzle only her bloodline could solve. Which is why Sarah was the one unlocking them. Not by choice, but by design. And then her mother said something that shattered everything Sarah believed about the past. "Brooke wasn't taken," she said. "She ran." Sarah didn't understand. Her mom explained that Brooke had discovered the truth weeks ago, long before Sarah found the recipe card. She had decoded one of Ruth's memory vaults and realized that Ruth hadn't been running from danger. She had been hiding something dangerous inside herself. A synthetic sequence, a data pattern designed to infect memory itself, turning thoughts into programmed directives. Ruth had buried this sequence deep inside her own subconscious, locking it behind layers of fragmented memories. And the group? They hadn't been trying to suppress her. They were trying to stop her from releasing it. Brooke had found a key, and she didn't want anyone else getting close to the truth. That's why she staged her disappearance. That's why she left the yearbook out. Sarah hadn't been digging up a conspiracy. She had been manipulated from the very beginning by her own cousin. The weight of betrayal hit Sarah like a wave. The messages, the warnings, the threats, it wasn't the group trying to scare her off. It was Brooke. And now she was out there, somewhere, with access to the final vault. Sarah looked down at the key again, Vault 12. It wasn't a place. It was a person. The 12th vault wasn't an object. It was her. Sarah herself was the final vault. Ruth had embedded the last fragment of the sequence in her before she was even born, part of a long-running genetic code experiment the group had initiated decades ago. And if Sarah ever fully unlocked it, if she ever remembered the memory Ruth encoded into her, it could trigger something irreversible. Everything turned on its head. The people she thought were threatening her were trying to stop a release. The people she thought were allies were the ones leading her straight to danger. And if Brooke had broken free of the group, taken the decoded data, and disappeared, it meant she was either trying to destroy what was inside Sarah or activate it. Sarah was no longer the seeker. She was the secret. And now, the question wasn't whether she could solve the mystery. It was whether she could survive it. Sarah sat in the dim light of her apartment, blinds shut, phone turned off, the iron key now clutched tightly in her hand like a lifeline. The air was thick with a silence that didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a pause before something terrible. Her mother's revelation still echoed in her ears, each word cutting deeper the more she processed it. She wasn't chasing a mystery anymore. She was the mystery. Every clue she had followed, every coded message she thought she discovered on her own, had been part of a path she'd been engineered to walk. Her memories weren't just her own. They might have been designed. She thought of childhood moments, dreams that had always felt too vivid, instincts she couldn't explain. Were they real, or were they part of the sequence Ruth had hidden inside her? It was a violation so personal that it made her physically sick. And the worst part was, she wasn't sure who she could still trust. Then came the knock. Again. But this time it wasn't her mother. It was Brooke. She looked thinner, more wired than Sarah had ever seen her. Her face was shadowed, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. There was no smile, no apology. Just urgency. Without asking, she pushed her way inside, locked the door, and said the one thing Sarah wasn't prepared to hear. They found the last vault. They're coming for you. Sarah felt her knees weaken. Who's coming? She asked, but Brooke was already pulling something from her bag, a worn envelope marked with Ruth's initials. Inside were photos, coordinates, newspaper clippings that had been blacked out, and a document labeled Activation Protocol. It was real. All of it. Sarah's body had been mapped to store a sequence of neurological commands. A kind of digital virus coded into memory, locked behind trauma triggers and sensory cues. Brooke explained that she had faked her disappearance to buy time, to find a way to destroy the sequence without alerting the others. She hadn't warned Sarah earlier because she believed the less Sarah knew, the safer she would be. But now, the group knew Sarah was unlocking it piece by piece. And if they couldn't extract the sequence, they would eliminate the host, her. That was when Brooke handed Sarah a flash drive. There's a way to overwrite the final trigger, she said. But it will erase everything Ruth gave you, including your own childhood memories. Everything tied to her. You'll lose her forever. Sarah felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. The choice was cruel in its precision. Protect herself and lose the last emotional thread connecting her to her grandmother, or hold on to Ruth's legacy and risk triggering the very thing that could destroy her and possibly others. Her whole identity, her connection to family, her understanding of who she was, it all hinged on a decision she wasn't sure she was strong enough to make. She thought about the VHS tapes, the handwritten cards, the smell of her grandmother's old kitchen, the quiet nights spent reading together. If all of that was embedded with the sequence, was any of it even real? The more she asked that question, the more she began to spiral. Then came the real blow. Her mother called again, her voice low and urgent. "They've turned on me too," she said. "You're not safe. Come to the cabin. I can protect you." But Brooke shook her head when Sarah relayed the message. "She's lying," she said flatly. "She's always been part of it." She just switched sides. It was too much. Sarah couldn't breathe. She was being pulled in opposite directions, and both roads looked like dead ends. Every person she loved was either lying to her, hiding from her, or trying to manipulate her into becoming something she didn't understand. She couldn't tell who was protecting her and who was using her. She wanted to believe Brooke, but how could she trust someone who had faked her own kidnapping? And her mother, cold, distant, complicit, but possibly trying to redeem herself. Sarah's hands shook as she held the flash drive. Her mind swirled with thoughts of brainwashing, memory hacking, psychological warfare. Concepts she used to hear in documentaries or conspiracy theory threads on YouTube, now playing out in her real life. And the clock was ticking. Brooke said they had less than 48 hours before the group made their move. In the chaos of it all, Sarah remembered something she had forgotten, her grandmother's last voicemail before she passed. She had never listened to the whole thing. Her phone had glitched, or so she thought at the time. But now, shaking, she played it again. Ruth's voice, faint but clear, said, "If you ever feel lost, remember this isn't just about memory. It's about choice. They will make you feel like you never had one. That's how they win." Sarah stared at Brooke. "What if this was the plan all along?" she whispered. "Not just to protect something, but to test how far I'd go to find the truth." Brooke didn't answer. She just looked at her, eyes heavy with something Sarah couldn't quite read. Regret, maybe. Or fear. Then, just as Sarah was about to plug in the flash drive, her phone buzzed. A video message. Anonymous sender. She opened it hesitantly and saw herself. A clip of her, standing outside her apartment 2 days ago, looking confused. But the video had been filmed from a high angle, from inside her own home. Someone had been in her apartment again. But this time it wasn't just surveillance. It was surveillance with audio. And in the background, a voice whispered something that turned her blood to ice. "Vault 12 is opening." The screen cut to black. Sarah didn't remember grabbing her keys. She barely remembered getting in the car or pulling onto the road. All she could hear was that voice on the video repeating over and over again. "Vault 12 is opening. Not going to open. Not about to be activated."
It was already happening.
Something inside her had shifted. A mental weight that hadn't been there before pressed behind her eyes like a migraine forming from within. She could feel it, images flashing just beneath her conscious awareness, fragments of places she didn't recognize, numbers that made no sense, and a phrase looping like a song lyric she hadn't heard in years. The pattern lives in the pause. Brooke sat next to her in the passenger seat, frantically trying to ping their source, someone she referred to only as Gray. A former insider, someone she'd trusted with decoding the last layer of Ruth's journal. But Gray wasn't answering now. Every call dropped. Every message bounced. And then, her phone screen flickered with a bright white flash before shutting off entirely. Sarah's stomach dropped. "Is that part of the protocol?" she asked, her voice thin. Brooke didn't answer, but her silence said enough. They were being cut off, digitally isolated. Every move they made was being tracked, predicted. Sarah glanced in the rearview mirror and noticed the same black SUV she had seen parked on her street 3 nights ago, now 3 car lengths back. It didn't pass. It didn't fall behind. It just hovered. And then came the turn. Brooke told her to pull off the main highway, leading them to a nondescript warehouse Sarah had never noticed before. Just outside the city limits, it was surrounded by farmland and silence. Inside, however, the space was buzzing with activity.
People.
Screens. files. All underground. A hidden facility, lit by low halogen lights. Dozens of individuals, heads down, working through what looked like old analog tech. Real projectors, cassette decks, punched cards, all of it humming with eerie precision. They weren't just researchers. They were part of a global network. Brooke walked straight to a man in a gray coat, mid-50s, tall, stern.
"This is her," she said.
He didn't smile. He just studied Sarah like she was a puzzle piece being placed back into a box that had been gathering dust for decades. "You were never supposed to find the card," he said. "But now that you have, there's no turning back." Sarah finally snapped. "What is this? Who are you people?" The man turned to a screen behind him and pulled up a map, blinking red points scattered across the globe. "We are what's left of a program that started in the 1950s, he said. Ruth wasn't just a pioneer. She was one of the founders. Vault 12 was meant to be the failsafe, the last archive of human memory before digital collapse. Your grandmother predicted something no one else did: the death of personal memory in the age of artificial intelligence. She feared what would happen if human emotion, real memory, became obsolete. So she built a living archive.
You.
Sarah's mind reeled. "You're saying I'm a storage device?" "Not just storage," he corrected. "You're the backup system. The last clean record of pre-algorithmic emotional memory. And that makes you invaluable and dangerous." Brooke stood in silence, but her eyes darted away. Sarah's heart stopped. "You brought me here not to protect me, to hand me over." It hit like a punch to the chest. Brooke had never stopped working for them. She had just played a different role in the same mission: keep Sarah close, keep her searching, but never let her slip outside the bounds of the vault's activation path. Sarah turned, ready to run, but the man spoke again. "You don't understand. There are others. Not just you." And that's when the wall screen behind him lit up, revealing a dozen profiles, other people from different states, even other countries. All born around the same time. All having reported similar experiences. "Vault 12 wasn't one person," he said. "It was a cluster. You are the final node. The rest have either been compromised or lost." Sarah stared in horror at one of the faces, a woman named Eliza from Vermont. She recognized her. They had met once, years ago, briefly at a youth conference. Sarah hadn't remembered it until now. But it clicked. Eliza had said something odd at the time, something Sarah hadn't understood then. "Don't let them tell you the recipes are fake." Now, it all made sense. That memory hadn't been coincidence. It had been a trigger. One Sarah hadn't recognized until now. All around the world, these vaults were waking up, uncovering embedded memories and emotions recorded decades ago. But what the man failed to mention, what Sarah now feared, was that if she was the last node, then someone, somewhere, had already activated the others. And that meant she wasn't just being hunted. She was the finish line. The facility was no longer quiet. The air had shifted, grown electric with the buzz of incoming signals and hushed orders. Somewhere above them, the sound of helicopter blades grew louder. Sarah's pulse thundered in her ears as she stared at the screen filled with faces. Others like her, unknowingly entangled in a decades-old experiment disguised as memory, now awakened like scattered threads pulling tight into a single, suffocating knot. The man in the gray coat barked commands, but his voice blurred into the background as Sarah turned toward Brooke, her fists clenched, heart torn between rage and disbelief. Brooke's expression was unreadable, somewhere between regret and resolve, but Sarah had no time to demand answers. The map behind her shifted again, this time highlighting a single location flashing red: Vault 12's final lock, buried beneath a rural town in Missouri, hidden for over 40 years inside an abandoned government records hall marked for demolition. Brooke's voice was barely audible over the chaos. That's where she hid the last piece. The original memory. Sarah didn't respond. She just walked away, not looking back. The facility had an underground vehicle. Old, armored, silent. Within minutes, Sarah was en route to Missouri, the key around her neck pulsing against her chest like it held a heartbeat of its own. As she stared out the window, flashes of Ruth came unbidden. Her laugh, her touch, her voice calling her my sunflower. But now even those memories felt fragile, like they belonged to someone else. If the vault held the truth, then she had to see it through, even if it broke her. The building looked dead. Crumbling bricks, rusted metal, shattered windows like jagged teeth. But Sarah felt drawn inside, almost magnetized. Every step echoed louder than the last as she moved through dark hallways lined with old filing cabinets and mildew-stained walls. There was no sign, no markings, until she reached a sealed metal door tucked behind a collapsed bookshelf. Her hand trembled as she inserted the iron key. It turned with a mechanical groan, and the lock disengaged. Inside was a room no larger than a walk-in closet. At the center, a single reel-to-reel recorder sat atop a pedestal, wires snaking from it into a tangled mess of analog machines. A flickering monitor displayed a countdown timer, frozen at 3 seconds. And on the chair next to it, Ruth's journal. Sarah opened it, flipping past pages of codes, recipes, sketches, until she reached the final entry, handwritten and dated 3 weeks before Ruth's death. It said only this: "If she finds this, she's ready. The truth is not what they told you." The vault was never meant to store memory. It was built to rewrite it. You're not the backup. You are the reboot. Sarah's vision blurred. The machine clicked to life, its reel turning slowly as Ruth's voice filled the space, not through a speaker, but in a way that vibrated through the walls and her chest. "My darling girl," it began, "they will try to convince you that your mind was theirs to shape. But the truth is, you are the seed I planted when I knew I couldn't trust anyone else. The vault contains not what they want, but what they fear. The emotion, the grief, the love they couldn't program. You're not their product. You're their undoing." Suddenly, the screen flashed red. The countdown started again, 3, 2, 1, and the machine emitted a sharp, piercing tone before cutting off entirely. Then came the voice that didn't belong to Ruth. "You should have walked away." She spun around. The man in the gray coat stood in the doorway, gun drawn, his calm now replaced by frustration. Behind him, 2 guards blocked the exit. "You weren't supposed to get this far. The memories were meant to distract you, not lead you here." Sarah didn't flinch. "You were never looking for a cure. You wanted control." He nodded slowly. "Emotion is chaos. Memory is fragile. Ruth tried to preserve it, but it was always too messy. That's why we needed a reset. That's what you were built for, to reprogram the emotional spectrum. Strip away grief, fear, guilt. Leave only obedience." Sarah's breath hitched. "You wanted to delete humanity." "We wanted to refine it," he corrected coldly. But he'd miscalculated. While he spoke, Sarah reached behind the recorder and pulled the wire from the wall, exposing a second input, something Ruth had written about in a coded footnote. A manual override, hidden in plain sight. She inserted the flash drive Brooke had given her, and for the first time, she understood what it truly was, not a memory wipe, but a trigger. One that would upload Ruth's raw emotional archive into the mainframe and destroy the sterilized protocol they had created. "Stop," he said, stepping forward. But it was too late. Sarah pressed the button, the power surged. Lights exploded. The machines roared to life, with a sound that felt like thunder underwater. On the screen, faces flickered again. Eliza, the others, each receiving a surge of data that was theirs by birthright. Real memories. Real emotion. The reboot had begun. The man shouted, fired, but missed. The guards turned on him, confused, eyes clouding with emotion they hadn't felt in years. One dropped his weapon. The other backed away. The man screamed as he was pulled under by the very chaos he had spent his life trying to erase. Sarah walked out of the building as dawn broke over the horizon. But just as she stepped into the light, her phone buzzed. A message from a blocked number. "You started something." But the vault was never the end. It was the first step. And then an attachment. A single photo of Ruth standing beside another woman. Sarah's real mother. Smiling, holding a baby that wasn't Sarah, but looked just like her. The weeks that followed felt like walking through a world that had been tilted ever so slightly, like gravity itself had shifted and nothing quite rested where it used to. Sarah didn't return to her apartment. She didn't go back to her old life. That version of her, the woman who once believed memory was linear and love was something that just faded with time, was gone. Instead, she rented a small cabin in upstate Vermont, tucked between the woods and the lake, where silence felt more like a sanctuary than a threat.